Yeah, g'day, my name's Dave Pearce. I'm a ranger with the National Parks and Wildlife Service. I've been a ranger for 25 years and have managed Woomaragama National Park for the last 15 since the park was gazetted in 2001. Yeah, look, it's a fairly large park. It's 30,000 hectares all up. We manage all land management aspects of the reserve, such as fire management, pest control, both weed control and pest animals, which in this reserve, while we don't have major problems, we do have a wild dog problem, which most land masses in the southeast seem to have at the moment. We also have small incursions of pest pigs, feral pigs, and we have the small numbers of rabbits and foxes and what have you, and cats. But we've got good control programs for all the pest animals, and we also working with the local land services and all the neighbouring farms to control those pest animals. Well, this is fairly unique because it's only a new park. It's about 15 years old. So when we took over the reserve, which was like an amalgamation of some state forests and Crown land, and it hadn't had a lot of love, I suppose, for a lot of years. But then again, it hadn't had a lot of use. So it was a great block of land to take over because it hadn't been abused as such. While it was a state forest, it hadn't really been logged as such. And while it was Crown land, it had some permissive occupancies such as small-time grazing and some mining and what have you. But overall, it was a very good block, extremely intact in regards to the vegetation communities and fairly clean of weed species. And yeah, it did, as I said, had an array of pest animals in it, but a fairly intact block that was fairly clean and needed a fair bit of work in regards to trail maintenance and boundary fencing and things like that. But yeah, it was in fairly good condition when we took it over. It's a big park in relation to the country we are. I mean, Kosciuszko is 750,000 hectares. It's a huge park, and while we've got 30,000 hectares here, it's big in the locality that we are. It's fairly unique because most of this country, especially to the west, has all been cleared. So it's really on that interface between east and west, and because of that, you get eastern communities of vegetation and then the western communities. Where we are at the moment, more into peppermint and sort of boxy country, and you can get, once you get into the eastern portion, you get into the blue gum country and some ferns and some into some wetter country. So a really diverse block of land, some really good landforms, good lookouts, rocky lookouts, good cliff country, some nice streams and creeks. It's just fairly diverse and, as I said, fairly intact as well. Good understory as well, which understory is usually one of the first things that goes in a block. Sometimes you see a block of land that's got trees on it and it looks fine and dandy, but really the understory's gone. This block we're pretty lucky because we've got a really diverse understory, and you tie the understory in with the overstory, and it just helps the whole ecosystem work, especially with your fauna species. So yeah, it's a very special block of land. It's a fairly lineal reserve. As I said, it's 30,000 hectares, but it's fairly long. So you do encompass that eastern side to the dry western side where we are now. So yeah, you can walk through the reserve, which the human oval walk goes right through the reserve, and in doing that, especially when you're walking it, you'll see a vast change in scenery, and it won't be just an abrupt change. It'll be a sort of a varied change as you go through. You might go through half a dozen different communities before since leaving the eastern part to heading down the west here. So and it will get drier down here, of course, and it's moisture in that eastern section. But yeah, it's a diverse block of land, which is quite unique. Okay, well, the 85 fire was probably the biggest fire known to probably the people of our generation anyway here at the moment. It burnt, it wasn't the whole reserve, but I think it burned about 3/4 of the reserve, and it burned it fairly hot, of course. It removed a lot of fences, it took out a lot of vegetation. But look, in saying that, the native bushland is adapted to fire, And really the 85 fire, you won't see any sign of that 85 fire. Now we've had fires since then, of course, and some quite decent sized fires since the service has been here. We've also undertaken a lot of fuel reduction. So we've got a fire management plan for the reserve, and under that we'll do fuel reduction on blocks over the period of the last say 10 to 12 years. We've probably had 8 to 9 hazard reduction burns within the reserve, and we also do in conjunction with that, we keep the fire trails up to a standard where you can get category 1 fire tankers in most of the reserve. But yeah, look, the 85 fire, as I said, yeah, it was a big fire. Everyone remembers it of our sort of vintage, but it's come and gone. The plants are adapted to fire. That's all good. Some of the big droughts we've had, especially that millennium drought, look, it would have affected the reserve, where it affected all native ecosystems. But again, the joint bounces back. It's been here for millions of years, and it's been through a few droughts, I dare say. We've had some good floods here too. I mean, we had some crackers of floods there in about 10 years ago. Those big gully rakers we had that washed a lot, and you probably might talk later on about the Acacia phasmortes, but we've got some populations of threatened species in the park, and those gully raking storms you had really reduced the number of those populations because of just those weather events. But again, we get over it, things get over it, and you move on. I work for the Southern Ranges region, which our actually office is based in Tumut. While I'm based down here, I still work in the office out of Tumut a day, 2 a week. I'm probably the full-time ranger for this reserve. I've got a number of other reserves down here as well. This is the biggest one, but we also manage country at Tabletop and Mullinjandra, swamps at Walbundry and at Henty. So I look after all those areas, and primarily my role as a ranger is, well, I do a lot of hands-on stuff, but it's mainly management, organising works to be done, organising contractors and our volunteer group. Staff-wise, yeah, we have park staff based out of Tumut, and they'll come down here on a rotating sort of roster to do works when we're doing, say, weed control or pest animal work or roading works, general maintenance on picnic facilities or other activities as we see fit. But the volunteer group was probably formed, they've probably been going 5 or 6 years now, or 4 or 5 years anyway. They're probably a core group of about 15, and some of those days we'll have a lot more than 15 come along, and they're great. They're mainly local people, or localish as in Albury up to sort of Holbrook, a group of sort of like-minded people who have an interest in the management of the park, and they've taken on activities such as well, they've really taken hold of the fan and wattle, the restoration and the surveying of the fan and wattle. As I said, when the fan and wattle is virtually unique to Woomaragama. There is a couple of small populations in Victoria just across the river, and we work in with the Victorians. They've got it on Pine Mountain there and Mount Lawson, but we were down to a figure where we thought we only had less than 100 plants left in the park. But with the volunteers, with the aid of the volunteers, we've reintroduced it into the areas it's strongest in when we had those, as I said, we had those big storm events. But we've done a lot more surveys with the volunteers, and we've actually found over another 1,200 plants. And that's with the aid of the volunteers. So they've been a great asset to the parks because they bring the local knowledge in, and also the parks want to work with people because the parks are for people. So we want to work with the locals, and they're keen as mustard to work with us. So they've also just established a little circuit walk, which sadly the signs aren't up today. The signs will be up in the next week or two, and that's that actually starts here in this little picnic area. And I mean, this picnic area, when we took it over, while it still looks pretty rough, it was actually a quarry, and it's a granitic quarry, and by its name, granitic quarries are just extremely hard. I mean, they're just very white. You get here on a sunny day, and you definitely got to have your sunnies on. But how it looks now, all these trees have been planted by the volunteers and also by the Trinity Anglican School. It's just come leaps and bounds. So since we've planted some trees, we ripped it, shaped it, planted some trees, there's heaps of stuff just starting to come back in on its own. You can see all the daisies and what have you, and there's lots of other species now starting to incorporate and take over and establish in the area. So, and the volunteers are, have been involved in doing that work, so we've planted and they've been mulching and what have you. So cleaning that up, we've also, as I said, we've got a little loop walk which we've commenced, and that's nearly completed, and that's another job that the volunteers have taken on. Parks are a great thing. I mean, if you come to Victoria, especially northeastern Victoria, or you come over the border to New South Wales, there's some really good parcels of land you can go that aren't far out of town. A lot of them you can access in a two-wheel drive. Why you can't go right through Woomargama in a two-wheel drive, there's areas there that you can get to. Like you can get to say this area here, we're going to have a walking track, a loop trail that'll take you about an hour and a half to 2 hours to walk to give you a good idea how the ecosystem works. So there's various areas you can get to, pretty close to major population centres. So, and they're preserving areas that, look, they're here at the moment, but if we don't preserve them, and the growth of Albury Wodonga and the growth of just southern New South Wales, that there's going to be times in the future that people will be looking at block for either development. Yeah, I mean they have been used in the past. There's a lot of this country was mined, and it had various amounts of small-scale timber removal, but still in good shape. But we've got to keep it in good shape and conserve it for our kids and our grandkids. But yeah, overall the parks in New South Wales, I reckon we've got a great system in New South Wales. I've worked in other areas as well. I've worked up near Sydney at Royal National Park. I've worked out at Tibooburra, out western New South Wales, and New South Wales is extremely diverse, and the parks within the reserve system are just as diverse, if you know what I mean. And we've tried to link them up, and even there's other there's other organisations like the local land services and who involved with land care and what have you, when they try to link the parks up with private land, so make sure some private linkages between big areas of bush and try to sort of regum the gullies and what have you. So there's corridors for wildlife from one reserve to the other. So there's a lot going on outside of parks as well. But yeah, I think all looks good for national parks in the future. I hope so anyway. We took it over as in 2001. It probably had been dormant for probably 5 years before that. It was primarily used for road base and also for local tennis courts and stuff like that. It's very good material for paving and for tennis courts and stuff like that. So while it wasn't a huge quarry, it was used mainly locally. So just probably the Shire would have used it for some road base and stuff like that. But so Holbrook Woomargama, it wasn't used for any for big road construction, but it would have been used locally until it was exhausted, and then it came over to the service because it was actually in the portion of land that we took over in the reserve. Tin mining wise, yeah, look, there's if you go into the middle of the park, there's an area called the Tin Mines, which is an old dredge hole. And if you walk around the area, there's various water races. There's also pits, so there's some vertical pits. So now and again you've got to be careful where you walk, and they're not documented at all as well. We've come across a few, and the main ones we've come across is during the fire. Of course, the vegetation's burnt out, and then you see this pit. Most of them are only 6 to 8 feet deep now, but there would have been vertical pits throughout the area. So the area was mined for tin and for other metals, precious metals and elements as well. And you can have, if you look through the tin mines area, you can find remnants of water races and what have you. But at the moment, it's all been naturally revegetated itself. But there's still the dredge hole up there at the tin mines, which is quite interesting to have a look at.